Hello and welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farron, co-owner of the company Horns of Odin, and I'm joined as always by Dr. Matthias Nordvig. A sleepy Matthias Nordvig this morning.
Thanks to our guest Eirik Storesund. I've had to get up early.
I'm sorry about that.
You're fine. Welcome to the show, Eirik. You're the podcaster, Brute Norse. You run a blog, and you also, do other kinds of things that, are generally involved with things like Nordic mythology, pre-Christian Scandinavia, and so on. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. This is my first time live on YouTube, I think, so it's a debut for me, for sure.
Thank you for taking the time. I know I've certainly enjoyed some of your articles before in the past, in particular the one on the Valknut was what first brought me to your page, to your website.
I think that was the first thing I ever wrote that actually got like something akin to like a viral traction, I think. Though, of course, I've written other articles as well that are certainly some of my more popular stuff. I think that's what many people associate with me, these kind of debunking articles, which of course is not my full intent. I don't want to just take stuff away. I also want to add something to things, because I think that actually this, getting clarity on these subjects does actually serve a purpose also, beyond just being reductionistic,
You wrote the Valknut article. You're also, I think, very famous for debunking the Yule sacrifices as another example of like these standard myths that we have about what did people do in the Viking Age, what did people do in pre-Christian Scandinavia, and so why do you feel the need to do that, actually?
It's a good question. Okay, so I'll try to keep it short and snappy, but I started out as a fairly just ambitious student of Old Norse philology at the University of Bergen in Norway, and I had my ambitions were always to pursue academia full time. I had those big academic dreams, but when I first started getting into that, before I got that far, I had like a vivid interest in the Viking Age and living history, and I was always sort of like, I always wanted to get into the nitty gritty and try to discern what is the bullshit from the truth here, also, probably partially because I was eager to understand. I had this, this religious drive to try to understand also how people in the past fought, and I think that that's always kind of been with me through all my, I've been around the, how should I say that, the subcultural block a few times and experimented with all sorts of worldviews. But I think that some constants have always been there, and that's like my need to try to understand how people in the past fought, and what remains with us to this day, like fundamentally an existential human question, I think. So I always thought that source critical academia was a resource for that, and there are different schools of thought about that, I'm sure. But yeah, so that's why I always felt that the quality that was out there and the content was very introductory, and people didn't have access to the sort of stuff that scholars just talk about in their break room or whatever. So that was how I first started out with the precursor to Brute Norse was more like a Q&A thing, which drove me up the wall because I was so tiring to just answer people's questions all the time. And ultimately, I think I was also growing disillusioned with academia. I was going off into a more avant-garde style. I started doing lectures. Instead of conferences, I would go to art shows and do lectures. I did art curation and even like a few exhibits for a brief time. And in the end, sort of like all of my other interests started converging into this thing that is Brute Norse, which is all about sort of like this kind of punkish DIY approach to it, which is also interested in the spiritual aspect of this, but is ultimately also about the academic craft behind it. And also I'm very interested in the reception, how we use symbols and Norse myth, and what sort of role symbology plays, say, in NeoPaganism, or what schools of thought there are there, So.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking as somebody who's very familiar with the symbols and the imagery that we know from all kinds of objects from pre-Christian times, just like broadly speaking, I mean, I can see, and I'm personally a big fan of what you do with the material, like putting images from a brachiate on the back of a bomber jacket, like that kind of stuff. I mean, it's great. I love the confluence of like different times and eras, basically, that's happening in all of that.
Well, yeah, that's what I call ScandiFuturism.
Exactly,
course, which is just I needed a term, kind of buzzword, some kind of like newspeak term that I could apply, whenever somebody tries to, like, because people always try to pigeonhole you. I notice that when people don't understand what you're saying, they make assumptions or whatever, and of course, even when you do say what you do, they still make assumptions. But I could always just say that, this is ScandiFuturism. So when I'm saying some sort of bullshit, it's at least very clear what I am bringing here, what is my bullshit, as opposed to other people's is bullshit or whatever, So I'm not saying that this, like, everything I say is completely, like, objective, because it's not, obviously, but yeah. So I want to create that sense of confusion in time. I think that's important to, because the past is not something that just we discover, right? It's not just something we dig up. It is also something that we affect through our use of it and how we approach it, and it's constantly changing, just as the current is changing as well.
Yeah, and I think this is actually a really good point, both from a scholarly level, but also from somebody who is interested in scholarship, but isn't necessarily a scholar himself. Like looking at this stuff, like saying, the past is always with us in one way or another, and we can't objectively look at it. We will always be caught in some weird little box that we have brought with us. And sometimes it is very easy for the person looking at the person interpreting and analyzing and say, well, the box that he brought with him is definitely a Nazi box, or the box that he brought with him is some kind of weird Marxist box, or those kinds of things. But for most people, broadly and generally, for most people, it's always a mix and confluence of a lot of different influences, right? So
it's a constant spiral and feedback loop that just can be very dizzying, actually. And
I think it's really important to be honest about that.
I guess that everybody's own personal life experiences will affect how they look at history as well, and how they look back at the past. How one person might interpret something, another person might interpret completely different based on their own political views or life experiences.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, full disclosure here, like a lot of my stuff comes, well, for one thing, I was also like, I think when I was in my teenage years and early 20s, I was very like full on Reconstructionist heathen. Like that's what I was. I was like, we're gonna like try to, and like my professors like Elder Hayden and stuff like that. We really don't know that much, about their worldview at the end of the day. And I was just kind of like, yes, but I kind of refused to accept it. So I was also, and I've always kind of been like I've always been kind of savvy and in with the counterculture. Always recognized myself in like kind of these oddballs who stand outside of society, or like who are kind of these trickster figures who have this kind of ironic and edgy approach to things. And that was a thing that, was quite possible in, say, the 80s and 90s, for instance, but it's become, increasingly suspect as we venture into the new millennium. And I think that, in some regards, all of my influences are people who were like 10, 20 years older than myself. So maybe like I'm more like mentally Gen X or something like that. I don't know. So felt kind of out of step with a lot of my contemporaries. But yeah, no, I was also very like, you know, it was easy for me, at least at first, also to kind of find that there was something interesting about these kind of subcultures that are kind of critical of the modern world, you know, and the industrial world and things like that. So I've sniffed around in those parts as well. But ultimately, I've found that even those kind of subcultures have something interesting to them, I ultimately found that it was often just too tied up with like contemporary politics that I just wasn't interested in, you know. But I think that's those kind of subcultures are you know, they've kind of mutated and they're still around very much, and are an important influence probably for at least subsets of what we're going to discuss today, I'm sure.
Yeah, so that's actually interesting that you say this, because this is our first show that we're recording after
Capitol Hill Gate.
Yeah, I don't even know what to call it. A bunch of fucking traitors tried to storm the Capitol, and we're seeing, you know, we've seen images of this jackass with and sorry, I'm not going to sugarcoat any of this fucking twat with a
That's the most British you've ever sounded.
He's got a Valknut tattooed. He's got something that looks like a Thor's hammer and all that stuff. Wearing
the worst Milner I've ever seen in my life as well.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Wearing some fake ass Native American head regalia. It looks like actually coyote skin. And
he's also got the generic Google Yggdrasil around the nipple as well.
Yes.
That's
I was about to say, yeah.
That's the one that when you Google Yggdrasil, that's the one that comes up. Everyone will have seen it. It's, you know, as basic as you can get when it comes to getting an Yggdrasil tattoo. No offense to anybody out there that has the same one, but it is very much the archetypal one you see.
Yeah. So, yeah. What do you think about that?
I want to say that at least, like, if I'm going to give him some credit, I think that the hammer is actually the most original design there.
It actually is.
Well, yeah.
So I don't. So reluctantly, I'm going to give him that. But you know, there's a few things to say about this, of course, and it's very regrettable that this is such a topic, and you got the media going around like saying that all of this is synonymous with white power and stuff like that, which is of course complete hogwash in some ways, but in other ways, you know, it's a confusing terrain for these people to navigate, because quite frankly they don't have any clue what they're talking about, you know. So there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, I think that's what we need to keep in mind as well, is what I've repeatedly said on this show, is that it's not the audience of this show that we need to convince. Otherwise, it's the average Joe on the street who knows nothing about this culture and this community who sees something like that, and then they just see somebody else maybe on Facebook say, oh, well, that's a white supremacist symbol, and automatically that connection in their mind is then made. So every time they see that symbol, because they don't know any better, and you can't really blame them, because I guess it's just like us going on Facebook and seeing a symbol from a different culture and somebody saying it links to something like white supremacy, and you kind of just take it at face value if you don't know the in-depth.
Yeah. Well, I'm also like, there are also other things that I'm that concerns me about this, and it's one of the things is that that these journalists they take things at very much face value, right? Because when you actually look at this guy's worldview, there's not a lot of NeoPaganism, not a lot of Norse, like Asatru in this guy's worldview. Maybe there was at the time he got these tattoos, I don't know, but like when you see this stuff. Yeah, when he posts, it's like full-blown Jesus freak. It's like conservative Christian, you know?
So wasn't he outside holding a sign up, something to do with God is great or something? I'm sure I saw that.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. But like he does that, and he's got this full crystal healing stuff. So this is really just your run-of-the-mill sort of like right-wing American, New Age adjacent sort of like conservative Christian stuff. It's nothing new.
Yeah.
But I think that this is something that I often talk about. It's that that in sort of in the Western hegemony, you know, which is like, what is that, like France, England, the USA. I don't know. There are probably others that could be included there.
Mm-hmm.
None of these cultures associate themselves with this, you know, Germanic heritage. So it's very easy for them to just say that this is inherently suspect. You know, it's like you can't go around saying, like in the UK, that like Boudica is some sort of like nationalist symbol or something like that, because it's like it's a symbol they're sympathetic towards. Just like in Scandinavia, just seeing somebody with a rune tattoo in Norway, nobody thinks twice. They might think that they've got eccentric interests or something, but it's not something that is inherently suspect.
No, I mean we as I've said before, we in Scandinavia we have even graffiti that's like runic designs or from, you know, even from rune stones, you know. So it's like it's very common. It's part of a general identity. Go to the city hall in Copenhagen. If you're ever in Copenhagen as a tourist, I definitely advise to go to the city hall. It's a really interesting construction in and of itself. It's basically a replica of the city hall of the medieval Italian town Siena. So it's like the Copenhageners were like, yeah, let's copy that in the early 1900s. And then they loaded it up with pictures and imagery from like paintings from the sagas. You know, there's like these huge ballrooms just full of Odin over here and Hrolf Kraki over there, and, you know, all of that stuff. So I mean, these things are very, very normal to us in Scandinavia.
Yes, but as I said, like the kind of in the English speaking world, like interest in the, and I would even wager that in America there's kind of like, it's a very strong word, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Like there's a little bit of anti-German sentiment in American culture. Like it's not the heritage you're the most proud of, you know. It's not what you speak the loudest about, you know, because, you know, 2 world wars, you can't really. There's no shock, you know why, but there's not like, it's not exactly a super celebrated thing outside of like sausages and beer, you know. And so like and so this kind of like, if you even know what the runes are, like or a very strong interest in these subjects is kind of like, it's kind of like a marginalized thing, not necessarily in that it's always something suspicious, but it's always something that is kind of like weird, you know. Why would you be interested in that? And that's like a typical, like, kind of like, as I like to say, it's kind of like a Roman thing, you know. It's like this kind of bias towards what is barbarian, you know. And so like, and whatever is marginalized gets appeal, you know. It's appealing if you're not if you're not in that kind of in group, if you're part of that kind of opposition. Any symbols that are rejected, and this is esotericism. Esotericism is rejected knowledge, right? I think that's Wouter Hanegraaff's definition. That's a scholarly definition, by the way. And in kind of what we could call the cultic milieu, anything that is rejected is accepted by that, you know, so that gains sort of that appeal. And that, in that regard, like these... this association between like the far right and NeoPaganism becomes sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, you understand where I'm going with this? Like, we always imagine, like, for example, the Nazis to be like these kind of pseudo-pagan, kind of like blood wizards, you know, who just worship this, you know, these Aryan godmen and whatnot. But there's a whole, like, that's a whole other podcast, unfortunately. But the fact of the matter is, like the Nazis were tremendously Protestant. You know, they were their own kind of ethno-nationalist brand of Protestant mostly, but it's like undeniably true that, like, if you look at the Norwegian Nazis, for instance, they were horribly Protestant. Like they weren't as pagan as they were anti-Catholic, basically, you know? Yeah,
no, that's a really good point. And do you think then that there's a part of all of this then that also makes it just easier to focus on that one douchebag who's like wearing some pagan Nordic symbols, while they're blaring Christian music outside, and they're all talking about God this and God that, and have just come out of the evangelical churches and all that stuff.
Of course,
do you think it's easier to simply just like, oh, look at this idiot over here?
Yeah, it's obvious. Yeah, it's easier to disassociate with the things you never associate with in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing with and it's the same thing with kind of this this notion of Nazi occultism, right? You will see it even like serious scholarly books will tell you that like the Nazis had like this kind of like this blood religion is probably a good term actually for what the Nazis did, but to say that this is like some like neo-pagan thing, there were like small like historical Nazi groups who definitely were neo-pagan in this weirdly social Darwinist way, like kind of like mythologized social Darwinism, but like very rarely do you see anything like of the kind like that a modern neo-pagan would recognize as their own, their own religion. And these people were extremely marginalized within the Nazi groups. Some of them were completely banned even. But it's comforting for people, after the horrors of World War II, to say that, well, the Nazis really weren't like us. They had these weird ideas and they had these weird interests, and like they weren't church-going Christians like you and I, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's really that's also the danger, right? Because if we're not recognizing the fact that these Nazis, they were just exactly like modern human beings of all kinds, then we're also forgetting that it can happen again, right? We're basically ignoring that it is a matter of like your moral compass more than something that is inherent to your nature.
Yeah,
whether or not you do
90% of the people, have you ever seen that like that meme? It's kind of like, it's a very like self-serving kind of meme where there's all of these. I'm not gonna do it, but there's all of these Nazis doing like the salute, and there's like one guy who's got his arms crossed, and they're like, yeah, be this guy, I'm sure, yeah, by all means, be this guy, but like 90% of us aren't that guy.
It's 90% incredibly hard to be that guy.
Yeah.
It's hard to be that guy when you're gonna get shot for being that guy.
Yeah. And most of us,
it's easy to say be that guy, 70 years later when there's no danger to you.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Many people are simply just willing to go along with whatever gives them the least hassle in any given moment.
Of course.
And that's always that means that you're going to be in with the ideology of your in-group. Be that like your little like redneck town, like you're in the Rust Belt or whatever, or if you're like a hipster living in like Brooklyn or whatever, I mean,
this guy on Capitol Hill, and obviously others like him who kind of these white supremacist group who use these symbols. How much of it do you think is to do with anything to do with the gods or any sort of religious side, more than it's just they look at the Viking culture and think, oh, these guys were warriors, so I want to use those symbols because of that. It's not that, for me anyway, they can be Christian, but also they just look at this culture and see these, the Viking warriors, they're meant to be the toughest, the hardest, the strongest. So they use those symbols to try and embody that rather than actually on a religious scale.
Yeah, well, it's a complicated question. What is religious? Scholars of new religious movements would of course say that none of these things are mutually exclusive. You can have all sorts of different ideas floating around that express themselves in different ways. But yeah, if you go on like the kind of weirder fringes of the far right, what is one of the biggest taboos today? Well, that's to be an atheist, basically. It's like the one thing that you should not be. There are other things that you should not be, according to them, but like one of the biggest taboos is certainly like atheism. That's like the biggest faux pas. Like even if you align yourself with them or something, like if you don't believe in some like sacred, principle, then that's like, well, what are you really? What that is, I think that is often just down to like whatever scene it is, and a lot of it is down to aesthetics, I think, really. But that's the same with also true. people have, I'm not going to say that like anybody's religious convictions are not real or proper or that they're fake or anything like that, but I think that a lot of it really is aesthetics. Like I talked, or aesthetics and philosophy, morals, all of these things tied together, of course. I was talking to a friend yesterday, and we were talking about this kind of like this solar thing that is floating around in some of like the pagan subcultures. We have like this big emphasis on this like one like big powerful like image, and that had us thinking about, well, what about like the concept of like a supreme entity, a godhead or something? That's just not something that appeals to me personally. So I'm unlikely to kind of pick those sorts of symbols, I think.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And this is also when it comes to, if we look at sort of the broad long-term perspective of neo-paganism, we can perhaps get even as far back as the 1700s.
Yeah, there's something fashions.
Yes,
all of them,
and yeah, you see this idea of the solar godhead, for instance, like cropping up here and there, right? And usually they also come with other social developments that sort of spell similar ideas in different ways. This is actually an idea I just had the other day. It's like, last time neo-paganism was a really big thing in broadly in culture, Western culture, that's when shit hit the fan too. Right? I mean, that's when we had world wars about all these kind of things. Do you think there's anything about neo-paganism and its presence in society that spells, I don't know, some kind of disaster? Because okay, so the train of thought here was simply that what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of people who have a hard time separating basically fact from fiction, who have a hard time, navigating knowledge, basically. And, I think a lot of them
navigating knowledge, I think that's...
that's probably a better way to talk about it than saying fact and fiction, because, what is fact and fiction?
Well, there are parts of, like, as always, in the counterculture, knowledge has always been sort of power, Mm-hmm. So of course, just to go backtrack a little bit on like the political instability aspect of it, I think it's a dangerous assertion maybe to make that the barbarian religions go together with barbarian times. So that is certainly
that wasn't what I meant by saying that.
That's a very seductive thought, I have to say. very, very appealing to because I always talk about barbarians and sort of like try to like both like sort of question the existence of barbarians, but also try to make people see their inner barbarian or this trollish aspect of themselves. But there's certainly like with the demise of traditional academia, I think that like academia as we know it like is sort of like has been sort of digging its own grave. I'm a refugee of the Norwegian precariat, where I couldn't get a job to save my life, working really shitty hours at otherwise very sweet gigs, at museums and things like that, and just not being able to make ends meet. And there's like an overabundance of people who are educated, who do like us, who instead of going into academia, we become content creators and things like that. And I think we're going to be that's going to be a big challenge for academia to keep up with in the long run. Mm-hmm. But also the other side of this is, of course, that like anybody can amass huge PDF libraries now. Like the know-how that you and I had to go through to get the know-how that we do, like by going to conferences, staying current with things, and also learning kind of the folklore and the oral culture of academia. People can learn a lot of this stuff without ever going through that process.
How many people do you think actually do that? like you say, there is the knowledge is there to be learned, but I would say that most people, or the highest percentage of people, are just lazy nowadays, and they don't want to go down the avenues of having to read themselves or dig out the information themselves. And whilst it's there, it's easier just to look at the headline or read the first paragraph and go, okay, I got this. And I think not just in this culture, but in general across the world, that's why clickbait headlines are so popular, because people read the headline. Most people don't look at the article. They just go, okay, I know what this is about, and I'm going to go and tell my 10 friends on Facebook, who then go, oh, that must be true. And I'm going to tell my 10 friends. And then it just
But that also comes down to authorities of knowledge. So whether it's journalists or academics, it's the same situation. We have people who are monopolizing knowledge, and then they are making it partially available to those who don't have that monopoly, right? So, for instance, when it comes down, when we're talking about clickbait, right? You know what? That shit's designed. There's somebody who made that, right? Mm-hmm. So that person who made that is responsible for those people who don't investigate it and don't, try to develop their understanding of it. And
I'm a sucker for falling for it as well. I mean, I've clicked on those ads that say, look at these 10 celebrities. You won't believe what they look like now.
Yeah, exactly.
And you never fucking find them.
No, that's. I think a lot of people, regardless of their level of education or anything like that, actually fall for that stuff once in a while. And that's because
it's over all the time.
But speaking about the academic side of all of this, one of the things, Eirik, you're saying, well, academics, they have basically been digging their own grave for a while now. And I completely agree with that. One of the main ways that academics have been doing that is by monopolizing knowledge, and especially doing it in the sense that you establish yourself as an authority, and then you present that to the world without ever questioning your own authority.
Yeah,
and also being open about the fact that your authority should be questioned. I mean, academics, regardless of who they are and how far they are in that hierarchy, they all make mistakes of various kinds, and this is very important to keep in mind, right?
Yeah, but this is but as I was going to say, this the people who have the attention span. Well, this is a civilization with ADD, It's but yeah, regarding this, there's going to be people out there who are going to be able to sway, and there are people already who are able to sway people into thinking that their bullshit is well researched and stuff, just by digging up some articles and some old books here and there, and saying, well, I don't know, Jan de Vries says this or whatever, and they've heard that Jan de Vries is a huge important scholar, and he is. But then they're but it's completely isolated from the rest of the discussion, that others might, and so there's going to be a whole, I think in the future there's going to be a whole much bigger challenge of this democratization of knowledge is going to create a more multipolar thing where people can create little cults of personality around themselves. Well, Varg is a great example of that, where he's just, he doesn't really cite sources. He's just this 100% personal gnosis, right? But there are other people who have who have the ability to read a book, not just write them, and I think a lot of I'm sure I don't know if somebody's commenting under this video or something that Varg has tons of footnotes in his books and stuff like that. I think that a lot of his prison era books are ghostwritten, frankly. So I think that his etymologies, I don't think he wrote them. But that's another topic altogether, which I'll probably be attacked for now that I've said it. But that's my opinion. I don't have any proof for this.
You're
I'm
welcome
just speculating. Because he doesn't know Old Norse. He's demonstrated it. He didn't forget that in the last few years he was in prison. That's
no.
I
mean he doesn't know shit. I mean he is. No. I agree. I think if anything, he's probably ghostwritten in those books. I
think in this day and age as well, it's easy to just especially if someone's charismatic and they can speak well, they know how to put together a nice video. You can easily make something that can be misinformation and spread it, and it gets taken as gospel. Because on YouTube you could have our video against somebody else's, and if somebody who speaks well, it's put together well. How are people going to know the difference without looking deeper into it? And most people aren't gonna. They're just going to click on the video, watch it, and then if it comes across as credible and they assume that the person is a credible source, then they're just going to take it and run with it and then tell other people it.
Yeah. Well, one of my most controversial articles is the one Clubbing Solomon's Seal, which is about the Ægishjálmur, and I think that one is interesting because that's gone far beyond the Valknut article in terms of like influence and where it's like been spread around.
Can you explain what that is, the basis behind it? It's something that I'm not familiar with, and I'm sure there'll be other people listening to this who won't either.
Well, okay, so basically, the general thing is that the Icelandic galdrastafir, are like they're often presented as this kind of indigenous Viking kind of sigil magic, right? That completely sort of exists as its own sort of like tradition that goes all the way back to the Viking Age and has its origins in the runes and things like that.
So is that like
basically
the
these?
type?
Yeah,
Symbols.
yeah.
So
yes,
it's like
yes.
you would get the Vegvisir and those type symbols.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. The Vegvisir and the Ægishjálmur,
Okay.
Which is called the Helm of Awe or something like that.
Helm of Awe,
English,
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So and the big, everybody goes like there and thinks that this is a Viking Age symbol, when in fact the origins of this goes back to like continental magic. Mm-hmm. That's what it is. It's like Solomonic, like demonology sort of stuff, which Icelanders were very well-read folks. They had access to a lot of books. They sent people down to the continent to get educated, and books of magic from the continent traveled to Iceland. Galdrabók manuscripts are full of continental magic.
Yeah. And
there's an acculturation that happens because Icelanders were they were kind of culturally narcissistic, just like we are, and they acculturated what they found in these manuscripts and kind of wrote it into their own like tradition. So they're like they take these kind of rune-ish symbols and they say, oh, this is runes, but they also like these manuscripts refer to all sorts of things as runes, like magical alphabets from Greece, Greek alphabets, Hebrew letters, all sorts of things. But yeah, well, so the bottom line that I argued in that article is that, the Ægishjálmur is like early modern or late medieval Icelanders making shit up based on like legendary tradition, like terms that actually existed. Like there is an object called Ægishjálmur in the in Norse sources, and everybody who attacks my article, they seem to like they must have skipped that paragraph where I say this,
Is
I'm
that
not denying that this word or this concept existed.
Is that the helmet that's found in Fafnir's lair? Is it a helmet or a symbol, or
yes?
do they ever say exactly like what it is?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's implied that it's a helmet. I always assumed it was anyway. But it's like, but they say, oh no, it's actually a symbol you put on your head or something. That's the Icelandic sorcerers just making
I had someone tell me once, to come up to me at a convention that we were at, saying that it was like a lead symbol that they hung across the forehead, and the lead would make them go mad and fight harder in battle. And I was like, huh? What?
It's very funny with this game of telephone that like people will pick up something and then they'll get half of it and it will develop on its own.
It makes sense. It makes sense that some person would come and say that to you, Daniel, because I mean, a lot of medieval charms and stuff like that are actually written on lead tablets and you know, that kind of stuff. So that's probably where that comes from. Like, so it's
but how long would you have to sit with it on your forehead?
I'm pretty sure you'd have to keep it in your mouth. Like, you have to ingest lead to go mad from it, right?
Yeah, I mean, you get obviously. It's like the term "mad as a hatter" comes from hatters working with with like the lead rim, but surely that was like every single day, and they were probably licking the fingers and getting it in the mouth. It's not just putting a piece of lead on your forehead.
Yeah, I don't know how these chemical things work.
But yeah, so I get like a lot of the people who have issues with this are, of course, especially they're people who have either the tattoo, or they're people who like who sell apparel or something with this symbol on it. So of course they have business interests there, or they are like practitioners, modern rune magicians or something like that. And of course I have no quarrel with them whatsoever. But it's interesting because they'll say like, well, you can't trust Eirik Storesund because he's not a practitioner. Like, what do they know if I'm not a practitioner or not? Like, I mean, like, I don't. It doesn't say like Asatru in my bio or anything like that. And well, I'm not Asatru, I think. But it's funny what sort of like assumptions people make based on the signals, like the outward. Like signaling, and it's like I've dabbled with like ritual magic, like Thelema and stuff like that. Like I've been in the OTO, and I remember like there was a friend there like told me that like the people who say they do the most magic, who like project it outwardly the most, are usually the ones who are the least serious about it at the end of the day, Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. Like one of the things I've come across lately and find rather funny are the Völer from Iceland. So women who call themselves a Völva, which is apparently like means some kind of witch or something like that. Even though there's very, very little early modern tradition, medieval tradition for that. But they say then that this is inherited. This is like from a long line going all the way back to pagan times, and like, okay, fine, but and it's secret and all that stuff. Yeah, totally secret. Okay, why the hell is all of your profile pictures you with like feathers in your hat and a drum and all that stuff? How secret is that?
I also love like this idea that like this secret knowledge that has been passed on, because that's a stock theme of like esotericism as well, like this esoteric silence and secrecy, where it's like esotericism survives only because it's like advertising itself in one way, but it's always like it's like a stock feature of it that they have to keep secret the things that they're actually yakking about all the time. And there's always like one person who's like the last tradition bearer that only you met,
Yeah, exactly.
whether it's like runic wrestling or whatever, rune yoga.
Oh yeah.
Carl Maria Villegut, like who was actually like kind of like an actual like pagan Nazi, or though actually not. He was some weird like Aryan Christian kind of guy too. So again, as I said earlier, like this goes back to this Christianity thing. But he thought that like the Ten Commandments were stolen by the Jews,
yes,
from the Germans or something ridiculous like that, and that he was the secret king of Germany.
Yeah,
and that was a family secret, of course. You just have to believe him.
That was just his mummy telling him a nice story in the night, like, you are the secret king, though you were. All our parents have told us we're special.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, these kinds of conspiracy theories, though, are sort of ingrained in the Germanic literature, though. I mean, we have Sigurd, Dragon Slayer, right? I mean, we get it there, the secret line of the king and all that stuff. Some crank smith named Regin is sitting there telling him all this nonsense to get him to go fight the dragon.
I love this initiatory mumbo jumbo, So it's like, I mean, like I'm not one to talk with my idiosyncrasies, but I with my hobomantic auguries and whatnot. Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to ask was, also kind of on this whole white supremacy theme, how do you think we get away from it, in the sense that, because even there's some scholars who seem to be ingrained in it? Because one thing I noticed was when I posted on the the new Instagram for the podcast, which is Nordic Mythology Podcast, for anyone who wants to follow us. I posted on there asking for guests for this year, like who do you want to see? And we got a bunch of people back, and there was some names that come up, and I'd ask Matthias or other people would comment and be like, "Nah, fuck that guy, not him."
Yeah.
And I didn't know any better. So, and I'm a little bit probably more ingrained than most people. So how are other people going to know if I didn't know? And you know what I mean? If there's scholarly types who are kind of leaning that way, how do we get away from it if they're going to be, I guess, teaching their people who follow them who don't really know any better, but just getting led slightly in that direction?
Yeah, no, it's no, of course it's a difficult topic. I tend to be quite relaxed actually on these sorts of things. I think that you should just kind of like I try to stick to my own guns and be sort of very clear about like what my intentions are, or at least like lead through example, like just state my opinions basically in the degree that I have them, and if I have an opinion, it's usually very strong. but no, it is a very difficult question actually, because I don't think that the right approach either is every time like a crystal healer with some tattoos, as I said previously today. Like people see this Q shaman guy and they feel a need to run to their to their Word document or whatever, or to their Facebook page and distance themselves. And I think that creates an unfortunate association, because you're kind of, by doing that, you're kind of saying that there's something, introducing the idea that there's something to this, and
it feels like a double-edged sword in the fact that when we're going to talk about in a minute with the Rolling Stone article, where you get journalists who tar you with the same brush, so you automatically, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You either speak out and say, fuck these, these guys aren't anything to do with us and want to separate yourself, or you stay quiet and people just make the connection anyway.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I think one of the things that it's such a complicated topic, and it's difficult because I understand that people don't want to be associated with all sorts of stuff. But I'm also like, there's this kind of this notion that there's when you're abusing, symbols and appropriating heritage for some sort of ideological means. That's often like what they say, right? That like this symbol is being abused. But when I say that, that's all. It's always very like, I don't want to defend or anything like that, but it's always very one-sided, right? Because it's never like when people say kind of extremely like this very vapid stuff like that the gods are immigrants or whatever. Like, what is that supposed to mean? It's like or Tyr is handicapped because he lacks one hand. Does that make the Vikings like this kind of like social democratic utopia or something? Is it like, I don't understand. What is the point? It's a straw man, And I'm like, and isn't that an abuse of the heritage? Like, what is abuse here? That's what I want to know. Like, what is the wrong appropriation, or what is the right one? Because like, on the one hand, you have kind of these types who are like traveling around, like surveying all the content that other people are making, and making sure that they're sleeping, with both their hands above their covers, so they're not doing anything naughty under there, or like that they're not having any off-color opinions, or like that they don't have any political views that are, out of the center left or something, And it's like, I think that is also kind of like.
For me, I think abuse,
I understand where they're coming from, but I don't agree with the methodology. I think that's the thing.
Well, I was going to say, I think the abuse for me is when these people are using the symbols and it can have a negative effect on people who are using them in a regular kind of normal way or just in a respectful way. Because especially with this whole puncher Nazi thing, if you get these symbols attached to these white supremacy groups, whether it's wearing a Milner around your neck or a Valknut, the people who use them in nefarious ways, you're also running the risk of, say, if I wear a milliner around my neck, and if I go to a certain area, is somebody going to come and punch me for just being the regular guy who treats these with respect? So for me, that's where abuse would be, in that you can have a negative, especially in this case, a violent effect on other people who are doing absolutely nothing wrong, that are separate.
So there's some things that
I have a very high ceiling when it comes of tolerance when it comes to. So just finish my sentence. Sorry, it's a started out with a loaded statement. I have a very high ceiling of acceptance of odd ideas and a freedom of ideas, like not ideas that I share or anything like that, but like that total freedom, like flow of information and ideas. What I don't appreciate is like stuff like violence, racism, that sort of stuff. That I think is, fairly like obvious, clear things for me to just like avoid having any dealings with. But I think that I think that abuse. I see things that do make me angry, or like things that I really don't like, and that's especially like when it's being used in contexts that promotes kind of like this wholesale nihilistic violence, because that occurs also. You got these very weird kind of like violent Nazi subcultures who will use that sort of stuff, and I don't. It doesn't serve a purpose apart from being like a rallying banner for them in a way. So I think that like that's maybe like one of the lines that I draw, one of many potential ones. But I am, I'm very wary, from the get-go of talking about misappropriation, because I think that like if you kind of like fall down the rabbit hole that like in and drinking this homebrewed Kool-Aid that I made for myself, like I see appropriation everywhere. Like wherever Norse mythology exists, it exists to support, or like is promoted for some sort of purpose,
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah,
there's so much basically so much use. I don't want to call it appropriation. I want to call it use for the most part. Where people apply thoughts, ideas, stories, symbols, imagery, made-up imagery to this concept of Old Norse or Viking or ancient Germanic something, or pre-Christian Scandinavia, whatever you want to call it. And well, I mean, that it's for most part, it's no more less or more genuine than the other stuff that's happening out there.
No.
Like, so
there's a lot of people saying, making some really grand claims about other people, like using symbols wrong or something, when they have nothing to show for it themselves,
Yeah, exactly. And then, I mean, racism and use of these symbols and ideas for the purpose of racism is, I think, a very obvious line to draw. But are there other places where you would say, okay, this is somewhere where I'm not going to like work with this person or talk with this person or whatever? Like, are there other boundaries that you make around this material?
No, I think that like I have spoken with and met some peculiar characters in my life, but no, I'm usually, even if they are very extreme, I'm very curious about what drives them. I'm very curious about like why they ended up like they did, and I think that is because when I was younger, I had a lot of run-ins with people who either were kind of extreme then, or ended up being extreme, or quite oppositely, they had a past that they found regrettable and they weren't very happy about in the end, and that's like some of the things that people are talking about with this kind of QAnon shit as well. Like everybody now is very eager to get these people Oh, my internet connection is a little unstable here. Everybody's interested in getting, all of these people who are in on the kind of the Trump train these days, brought to justice or something like that. And people are very like bloodthirsty about it. But I think at the end of the day, these are we're talking about people who are perfectly capable of rehabilitating or changing their life, or like they're not at the end of their character arc or anything like that. And I don't mean that as like necessarily as as a normative statement necessarily. I'm saying that people do actually change, and like in the eyes and standard of society, these people are completely capable of coming back into the warmth, I think.
We live in
but
such an
they have to have the opportunity
time
to do so. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
We live in such an unforgiving time when it comes to things like this. People, you make one mistake when you're 12-year-old, and it can come back to haunt you and ruin everything that you've spent years to build. It really seems to be unforgiving. Like I was going to say before, when you said you get curious around some of these topics, and that makes me think you've got to tread carefully even being curious, because even just like taking an interest, trying to learn like what makes these people the way they are, some people will then automatically tie you with the same brush, because it just seems that that's the way things are at the minute. Everybody's looking to criticize everybody. It's a minefield.
I think it's very important to be level-headed about some of these things. Whatever you may think of for instance, Trump and his whole political platform and all that stuff. When people back in November voted, went to the polls and voted, they just performed a legitimate democratic act. So they did, equating what those many millions of people did when they went to the polls and voted for either for or against a candidate. That's equating that with what is happening now, what has happened like last week.
Yeah.
And holding all of these millions of voters who, for various different reasons, have voted, right? Holding them accountable. Yeah. That's not going to fly. I mean,
it's very work. Uncool. But it's sad to say it's it's a feature of American culture, I think, and it's odd, because when I moved to America, I thought that I think that Americans are generally quite agreeable, likable people. It's a very friendly and charitable culture. Mm-hmm. But I don't know why they have this kind of bloodthirstiness about them. Like they just kind of they love making enemies with each other and making blanket statements. It's like
there's the media that's definitely involved in that, mm-hmm. right? And that fuels that culture of that cancel culture that's also involved, where it's a do or die kind of thing. Like if you have this opinion, then you're either in or out, right?
I think cancel culture only serves to radicalize more people. Like that's what it's at the end of the day. There are more people getting radicalized by cancel culture than are being reformed.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
And I know that if somebody, like, people have tried to hold me accountable for completely bullshit things. Like I made a podcast where I completely ridiculed some of Varg's prison era literature, his UFO stuff. Mm-hmm. And somebody had like thought that I'd had Varg on my podcast and like promoted his ideology, and they had like this furious rant about like what kind of a monster I was and things like that. It's completely ridiculous. I tore them a new one, but I like ever since then I think that like I've thought, of course, if somebody tried to like cancel me with some bullshit like that, I would double down, Mm-hmm. I would fucking do everything I've done even harder. But I think that a lot of people who otherwise, weren't even that suspect to begin with, they go down like a very deep, dark valley after this, you know. We talked about like guilt by association before. Like these people are, you know, they're only going to have one place to turn.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. That's the main problem. I mean, yeah. Speaking of this subject and things you get accused for. I mean, you've also done a podcast or was it a YouTube video? I can't remember, with Survive the Jive, right?
Yeah,
and that is I mean, personally, I'd never do anything with that guy because that's too far for me. But what do you say to the people who you know, accuse you of nefarious thoughts and ideas because of that? Like,
well, as I've already said, you know, my threshold for speaking to people, like and meeting people, is very, very high. You know, and you know, I know Tom. I sometimes spoke to him before, you know, before I met him as well, you know, and he would, you know, ask me about stuff and things like that, and you know, I always, whoever asks me, I would rather, you know, give them my take, you know, about something than send them somewhere else, generally speaking. And you know, he was at that point, he was in New York City, and I hung out with him and his wife a little bit, and they were, you know, agreeable people, you know, from what I saw, you know. Of course, Tom is, you know, openly like right wing. You know, I think that's fair to say. I think he says that himself. It's very clear. Like he does everything but scream it off of the rooftops. I don't consider myself right wing. I don't. No. But there are, you know, I have fans who are right wingers. I have fans who are communists, who will say stuff like that Brute Norse to them, you know, provides something for them that you know, the left just often doesn't cater to, like a sense of belonging and identity. And I think that's it's kind of a sad thing that the right has a monopoly on that. You know, this sense of rootedness. That this is something that
I agree with that.
And that's like that's like the biggest card the right has. You know. So of course, if I was like a Norwegian nationalist, then I had a YouTube channel or something like that, I would fucking like it. I would milk that for what I had. So of course. So I think that's just like, you know, that's just how it is. There are tigers and there are cats and there are. But yeah, no, but I think that like that Tom also is like he's a conscientious person, you know. I don't know him very well, you know, and I don't know his affiliations or anything like that, but no, I stand by my video with him, and I thought that also the content that I wanted to show him was like the Norway Day Parade in Brooklyn, right? Which is actually like, it's a very positive thing. It's like the last remnant of kind of Scandinavian identity in Brooklyn, in a diaspora that is very much still active, but it's, you know, it's sort of vanishing and becoming kind of assimilated with the rest of the U.S. population in a way. So it was, the whole thing was kind of incidental and spontaneous, you know. But I don't have anything to regret, I think.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in the same vein, I mean, we have also taken some shit from having Jack Donovan on, and as I've said to people who have questioned that, I mean, we wouldn't bring people who are racist on our show. That's the line that we draw. And I mean, personally, I don't know enough about Tom Rouse to say if that's what he is or whatever. But I think it's you know, it's important to address these things nowadays, as we're seeing these things unfold. And we're all of a sudden seeing very clear symbols that are involved with our subculture, all of a sudden being involved with this subculture that is some weird mix of Christian nationalists, fascists, and New Agers, crystal hippies. I don't know. It's very. I think it could be very hard for people to navigate, and it brings me back to that the Rolling Stones article, and that basically equates the word heathen with white supremacists. That was the first version of that article, and since then, there's been a lot of people who have emailed them, myself included, by the way, telling them, guys, this is something that we identify with, and we're not white supremacists, and we do not condone any of this stuff. So could you please change that? Go ahead.
It's an extremely dangerous thing to write about. Like so I'm more likely to be mad at like the Rolling Stone, who should have like the sense and the critical thinking to not publish such obvious garbage, as that statement specifically was.
Yeah, I think the writer came out and said that she apparently like 99% of the people that she'd ever spoken to who identified as being heathen were sort of right-wing white supremacists, so that's why she put it. And that just seems like some sort of bullshit excuse, in my opinion.
Yeah,
that is a very bullshit excuse, if you ask me. I mean, that's absurd, because there's plenty of scholarly literature on this at this point. There are multiple specialists that are publicly available that they can just reach out to. Hey guys, right here. Like, you can talk to me if you need to. You can talk to Eirik if you want to. You can talk to Jennifer Snook. There's a whole range of scholars out there that have both a foot in the actual heathen club, so to speak, and also in scholarship. So that's that's bullshit, man.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, it's lazy. It's completely inexcusable.
Just for anybody
it is dangerous, as I said, because it is like one of the things, like one of the problems that I had with there's a Norwegian article about the so-called identitarian movement that in Norway that tried to map the existence and prevalence of so-called traditionalist groups and things like that, and identitarians in Norway, because at that time you had the generation identity, was starting to become very facamous in the continent. There were storming mosques and shit like that. It was very much associated with Catholic youth in Germany and France, I think. So again, not a heathen phenomenon in itself, but so there were some people, some right wingers in Norway who were sniffing, giving that identitarian stuff a sniff, and it was scholars were unsure whether they should deem any sort of a right-wing nationalist group, call them identitarians, or if it's the self-applied term you're referring to. So there was a bit of confusion there. So you have identitarians as a descriptive term and a self-applied identitarian term. And at that time, I had friends who were they were flirting with that sort of stuff, and but I don't think that there was any real identitarian movement in Norway at the time. Where this article was published, and fast forward a few years, boy, there sure is now. You could say there's not a movement, but certainly the term has stuck. Yeah. And I think that's why it's very dangerous with this sort of just throwing around terminology, just because it's common buzzword right now.
So you think
because people will associate with it, right? I think that a lot of the younger kids who started getting radicalized and started becoming this kind of right-wing thing, they probably read this article and thought, is that what I am?
No, that's actually exactly what I was going to ask you here. Do you think that to an extent, these sort of investigations and sometimes even paranoid approaches to these groups and ideas and terms and so on are part of actually like creating them in and of itself, like this weird feedback loop.
Yeah, it can be, but I don't think that should deter like scholars and like people who actually research this stuff from researching it. Of course, because as I said previously, like this this cultic milieu, these countercultures, they're always referential to the sort of content being made about them. They're always like Nazis are always reading scholarly works, like the intellectuals at least are always reading scholarly works about National Socialism and things like that. So that's inevitable.
Yeah.
But I do think that scholars need to be like anybody who writes about this, journalists or scholars, whatever they are, they should be very clear on their terminology. They should define it clearly, and they should be very conscientious about the stuff that they write. Don't just throw out anything out there for like for dramatic effect, because this is what will get them the more readers or get journalists to speak with them or something. Like there are some like in Norway, there's been like a severe lack of people who are like good understanders of that sort of stuff sometimes. But there are some, luckily, out there now who are like savvy. They understand the counterculture because they are themselves part of the counterculture, partially, Like, yeah.
I was gonna say, just to jump in, I wanted to actually just read the excerpt from the article that was most annoyance to me, just in case people haven't seen it, they're listening, so they have a little bit more of an idea what we're talking about. And I guess basically what they've put is talking about this shaman, whatever you want to call him. So what they've put is he has a Milner or Thor's hammer on his stomach, an image of Yggdrasil or Tree of Life etched around his nipple, and most significantly placed right above his heart, a Valknut or knot of the slain, an Old Norse runic symbol turned recognized hate symbol that is popular among white supremacists. In addition, the Milner has become a symbol of their identity among self-proclaimed heathens, in brackets code word for white supremacist aligned pagans, which is just fucking absolutely ridiculous that they would even. When I was reading it originally, I was like, no way, this must be fake, surely not. And I guess it's undeniable that there are some racist heathens. That's you.
Yeah, sure.
At this point, there's no. It's almost it's almost like that Trump saying that not all Trump voters are racist, but all racists are Trump voters, and it's kind of like not all heathens are racist, but whatever way around it goes, basically there are some racists within the heathen community, but by no means is it all of them by any stretch.
But it's kind of a spectrum, though. Like, I remember when Trump was first being, elected in 2016. Like, I spoke to people who were like, they were hoping for Trump to win just to stir the pot,
Oh, of course, I bet there was.
I don't think I realized like how much of a shit show it would be. I thought like what's the damage he can do, So of course some people have gained like a moral victory here, like through this mess. But I remember a lot of the. Like, I knew people who, like, were, like, probably, like, people would consider them kind of right-wing, but they would have preferred, like, somebody like Bernie, they said, at that point, But they're also sort of, like, they're kind of, like, they like the kind of anti-establishment talk, And
some people just want to stir shit up, and they just want to see whatever's going to cause the most drama.
Yeah. Which is like, I've how much drama can you fucking get? Like, I moved from Norway with small country problems. The only issues we had in Norway is like drilling for oil and cluster bomb investments in foreign economies. So foreign interventions. And suddenly I'm here, and there's riots, there's a pandemic, and I'm sitting here in my.
Yeah, no, I mean, sorry, I'm going to throw this out here, Dan, but as a European citizen, I have such a long list of countries I can just go live in without a visa, and I'm sitting here.
We can't do that anymore.
It's so funny. It's the whole world has like gone upside down. I remember like in Norway, like being anti-EU was like the classic left-wing political position. And now
Same in
suddenly
Denmark.
it's like, yeah. So it's like, so if you were anti-EU in Norway, you were always like left-wing. And today it's like the opposite. All the leftists are rooting for EU, and and like the right-wing populists are like cheering,
trying to take it down. Yeah, no, this is these are strange times, and I think it's curious the way things are moving. I am having a real hard time seeing anybody as a winner in all of this. I think right now we're all losing out greatly.
Oh, massively.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fucking chaos.
I don't know if it's because I'm getting older, like that like I'm getting more like tender-hearted and sensitive and things like that. I just and losing my edge. I just don't want. I just
don't want a revolution.
Yeah. Of course, there are things that I fought like when I was like 25 years old. I was like, that's not so dangerous. I was just chilling in my kind of quasi anarcho-primitivist cabin out in the like, and just thinking that I can treat everything with ironic distance and nothing matters, and like sort of like this kind of nihilistic approach. And now I'm less like I'm 32 but feel like 42, and I'm just like just tired, just sick and tired. Just be just be nice.
Should we wrap this? Should we wrap this up? I know you're short on time. I don't want to make you late for work or whatever you've got after this. Well, that's probably fine. Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you very much for joining us. I know we had to squeeze this one in, and you're welcome back anytime to discuss lighter topics or more things, maybe Norse mythology related.
Yeah, but I really like. I have a very like a masochistic joy of talking about these very difficult topics. So it's like it's very fun. But I think it's a very important topic, and I think it's one that deserves a lot of just complete, honesty. And of course, I do have the Valknut tattoo, the so-called Valknut, but I have the actual Valknut as well.
Yeah.
So we never got around to talking about that in the podcast, but
we will do. Like say
that like Valknut is an actual,
it's an actual thing. Yeah, no, I mean I have it too on my arm. So
nice. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that's another whole other thing, right? All of a sudden you see that jackass over there.
But also, like on a much more lighthearted note, of course, the connotation of this like Valknut, which is identical to the command symbol on your regular MacBook or whatever, is of course that in Scandinavia the association of the actual symbol with the Valknut name attached to it. Is a symbol for ancient monuments and museums and these pleasant, wonderful things that have survived the carnage of history to come to us from the past that we may enjoy.
That's it. If you got anything you want to plug your podcast, your page, anything you want to shout out before we wrap up?
Yeah, listen to Brute Norse. I'm on SoundCloud.com/Brute Norse. Follow me on Instagram @Brute Norse, I guess. I don't have anything else to say. Keep on walking backwards into the future. And and yeah.
Perfect. Matthias, what about you?
Yeah, you can always find me on Instagram under my name, Mathias Nordvik. And yeah, of course, always, if you're on Facebook, go give the Nordic Mythology podcast a like there. And do you want to plug the Instagram page?
I'll try to do everything else. So you can follow me personally at Daniel_Farrand1 on Instagram. Obviously, Horns of Odin. We have our own Instagram for the podcast now, which is Nordic Mythology Podcast on Instagram as well, where we post new videos, highlights, little bits and bats as we come across them. You can also message us on there. Obviously, if you want to support us further, you have our Patreon, which is just Patreon/Nordic Nordic Mythology podcast, where we do bonus material, video episodes, ad-free episodes, a bunch of material on there. Obviously, we're going to be looking at some merch shortly as well. And if you like the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating and a positive review. That obviously helps people who might not know whether they want to listen to the episode or not. Might just sway them in the right direction. And absolutely go and listen to Eirik's Brute Norse podcast as well.